Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to today's Grain Market Blast with myself and the crazy with a capital C, Angie Setzer, where Angie will be giving us the rapid roundup of latest pricing flows and market moving news in agricultural markets. But before she does, I'll get the legals out the way. Nothing discussed in this space session constitutes trading or investment advice or infers any kind of endorsement by PIQ, myself, Ryan Paisley, or indeed crazy with a capital C, glamorous with a capital G, Angie Setzer.
Yo.
Yo.
I said I was ready, but that's a lie. My headphones are slightly twisted. I'm going to power through, just so you guys know. But it's definitely something that's probably going to be haunting me throughout the next 15 minutes. So, no problem. It's okay. We're okay here. I'm not crazy, at all. So happy Tuesday. We just kind of here, again, looking forward to it. I think there's been a few people that I love. They say they're ag, like commodity tourists or ag commodity tourists. Like Brent is one of them, I think. And he says pretty depressing over there. I'm like, I have no idea what you mean. We're all having a great time. It's great over here. So happy Tuesday. Looking forward to it. What we're paying attention to though today, obviously, is a continuation of trade talks. We've seen a little bit of a reaction on the EU trade thing here. We saw what the Germany said today, that the European Union is negotiating from a place of weakness or something of that nature. And it appears like we're just kind of continuing to hammer out this deal. The Trump administration, of course, is celebrating it as a big thing. Our friends in the EU, maybe not so much, except for like Italy. They're happy, right?
Well,
She's happy.
and also, not that we're in the EU anymore, but us Brits are quite happy about it. I'll give you
right. Yeah. You guys got a better deal. You're like, see, they said if you line up first and whatever, you'll get 10%. If that's still what you're working towards. I'm not sure. That might have changed. But, I think the thing, and we saw that, Zach said it earlier this morning about how like, okay, these countries are kind of recognizing like, yes, these are loose frameworks of deals. Yes, they're going to pay a certain amount of tariff or whatever, but if they don't really retaliate, then they just kind of let the administration celebrate a win. It is what it is. And so like there's this sort of back and forth right now. It feels like when it comes to the excitement over it or whatever, the disappointment, there seems to be a lot of disappointment in ag commodity circles that it hasn't resulted in these types of phase one style trade deals. But, let's be honest here, like the first deals with Japan, Japan's already buying a significant portion of U.S. agricultural commodity products. It's very difficult to kind of increase that and really kind of allow them to manage their own risk and have, more than one supplier when it comes down to it. You've got South Korea is probably going to follow suit with Japan. The EU is a big buyer of, certain U.S. agricultural products, and there's the fourth largest customer for U.S. ethanol. Currently, they love U.S. ethanol. And so there is some room for increases, but, the countries that we've already done the deals with, they're not like China or whatever, where there's actual room to increase purchases, which that's always kind of in a gray area. And you can see like a market improvement or whatever, but like in this instance here, trade talks back and forth. I mean, at this point, sentiment's so negative in grains. I think you could have a China trade deal and they'd probably be like, whoa, they're not going to follow through on it anyway.
Yeah, right.
Like we'd be like, we just announced a monumental, they're returning to phase one, and every single person would be like, impossible. And we just have to live with it and deal at this point. And so that's kind of where we're at right now. We are watching, China's went into day 2. There's a lot of back and forth on, what they're discussing. Most folks think you'll get an extension out of this, though, what else is being discussed? There's a plethora of things. You've got your geopolitical aspects. You've got your, you've got Russia and Ukraine, which is geopolitical, of course, but like that's a specific, sort of thing. You've got, Russia, Iran, the BRICS. You've got all of these things that are, the two countries kind of have to discuss, I would say. And so it makes sense that we're having these sort of extended meetings, but it is interesting to me. It kind of feels like the last meeting where it was like, okay, well, we're not really expecting much, but this will be a nice little next step. And then they came out and they're like, oh yeah, we got a truce, 90 days, we're going to reopen these types of things, yada, yada, yada. So it'll be interesting to see, kind of what comes out of this. But beyond that, I feel like the biggest threats or the biggest like, oh my gosh, this is going to completely disrupt trade to a certain extent are behind us. Now that doesn't mean the tariff threats and things are like, we're going to have tariff threats for the next 3 years. But, when it comes down to it on the other stuff, like what are we really looking at, or what are we kind of coming up with on that side? So, anything you want to add on the trade
No,
conversation?
no, I think
Any,
you've covered it. I think the one thing to be aware of on the EU front, as we mentioned yesterday, and you kind of hinted at today as well, that again, the people need to remember that the EU is speaking on behalf of all these other countries, and at the moment, all these other countries are hating what the EU is saying on their
yes.
behalf. So
Yeah.
not only could we see an unwinding of the good news headlines that Trump's been able to wheel out, but it just it just inserts more friction into the EU domestically, which again it's just there's so many moving parts right now.
Yes.
Um, so it's one to keep an eye on. Was with Japan as well. Obviously, we're seeing Ashida saying that he's not going anywhere, like the scene from Wall Street. But again,
Right.
domestically as well, I think that might be, potentially create some issues for trade talks as well. There should be an agreement in place.
Yeah.
However, if he gets binned out, then it's all back to square one again. And we kind of know that at the moment, Trump is looking to get any deals across the line so he can post some like bullish quotes on Truth Social. So
Yes.
there's a lot of moving parts at the moment.
Yeshiva, if he's able to make it, right, like and I'm not an expert in Japan politics by any means, so like don't take this as me pretend, but it would be like
Na, 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 na,
right?
na, na.
it would be the first time, I think, in the last 70 years or whatever, that a sitting prime minister who has lost control of either the upper or lower house, or both, as in this instance, you know what I mean? Like typically they kind of push them to step down.
Yeah.
But after the election, you had mentioned that it wasn't as bad. Like they lost majority by 3 seats or whatever, yada, yada, yada. But so that is one thing to watch, is you kind of are, like the person who did the final negotiating and put it over the finish line is a little bit of a lame duck to a certain extent.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
And so you're going to have some political posturing and things like that. You'll probably see even people from the inside of his administration kind of go after him, because let's just watch House of Cards for a minute. Like that's kind of where you're at. So in any event, we'll see what happens. And like I said, at this point, the sentiment is so poor. I'm pretty sure you could have like a surprise trade deal announced out of China and the US today, and corn would close down a nickel. So who knows? But we are looking at a bunch of weather stuff, that is probably, it's gotta, I think, capture some attention. There is a lot of noise right now, and I am trying to determine, simply because we have seen some of these heavier rain events kind of spread into, what would be considered more important grain production areas, or provinces that are heavy grain producers. Now, most anyone that I'm talking to right now, and this is China in particular, if I didn't mention that part, most folks that I'm talking to right now are kind of like, it's not really a big event, yada, yada, yada. It's kind of happened in Beijing. It's centered in that area. But it is something to watch, because it does look like there's some heavy rainfall here for the next 2 or 3 days. And, like I said, like let's kind of pay attention, just to see if it does impact or not. At this point, no one's really talking about it, and it doesn't appear as though it's a major deal. But I have kind of had some things like this happen in China before that have snuck up on you. And then you're also kind of looking at, there's been some extreme heat in certain areas. They're dealing with drought in others. And so we have had this sort of conversation of like no weather issues around the world. And that's really more no weather issue centric to, the US. You've got Europe, the EU's got, some pretty sizable, potential production issues. You have seen weather kind of stabilize their outlook. It's not gonna, really kind of take it much further lower across a lot of the central grain producing areas, but you do have some issues showing up in the Black Sea. We've got, Ukraine basically is halfway through harvest. They've had some pretty hefty harvest delays. You've got some quality issues with their wheat, and some other things that have happened that you need to be paying attention to, simply because it impacts the flow of grain and available grain around the world. And so that'll be something that I'm watching closely. There are a lot of folks that are kind of saying that we may be overestimating, some of the wheat production, or at the very least, the wheat production that can fit into the milling quality square. And so that'll be something that'll be important to watch too as we move forward, just simply because it'll impact corn. But there's also some concern that you could see reduced production out of some other places. We'll also be watching today. There's a lot of talk yesterday about a derecho, working its way through South Dakota into Iowa, and working into Minnesota. It does look like there were some pretty high, wind amount or wind rates. I don't even know what you say about wind. Winds were high.
Speed.
There you go. Thank
There
you.
we go.
Whoa. But there were some pretty wind speeds reported. And so I'm not really sure, like,
Yeah. So okay.
go ahead.
So on this, I saw someone tweet like 100-mile plus. Is that
Yes.
legit or is that?
It looks like it was, I'm not 100% sure. It looked like right in that northwest Iowa portion. We lived in Algona for a while. So that's north central Iowa, Kossuth County. It's the only double county in Iowa. So if you're wondering where Kossuth County is, it's a big long one up on the Minnesota border. That's where we lived. And we had friends post overnight, or I had Carl and I had, friends post overnight that the sirens went off in town. And one of the gals said, the wind was blowing so hard she couldn't hear it.
Oh,
And so
hell.
it did look like there was a 90-mile-an-hour report, in Algona, but I'll know better today. Carl will be able to collect some data. It looks like it'll be, it's not going to be like the 2020 derecho that was like across the entire state or whatever, but that is one thing that I'm looking at right now is that we have a lot of conversation about these very, very big production numbers and some of these other things. And I don't want to say, I hate to say this because there's going to be certain people listening that are going to be like, that's impossible. But we're on the cusp across portions of Iowa and some other places of seeing too much rain. And like I said, I know that that's, typically what you think about in the market structure or this market itself tends to say for every acre that's impacted by too much rain, 2 acres benefit, right? So it tends to be a bit of a wash. No pun intended when I say that, but, someone alert Michael Brown, but it is something
Oh
that we
God.
need to be paying attention to. There are reports that, we have pollination issues that could be coming from excessive cloud cover and some of these other factors that we don't typically see. We have had some of the wettest stretches of weather in a lot of different places in the Western Corn Belt. And that's one other factor I want to look at is we did get crop conditions last night. And a lot of folks love to talk about the national good to excellent, like 74%, one of the best rated crops in all of history. But we're kind of ignoring, the dichotomy that's appearing between
Oh,
the
good
East
word.
versus West. I know sometimes I love to just be like, yeah, I did pay for that English degree. It was worth it. But you've got haves and have nots, East versus West. You've got, a lot of like Illinois is down 5 points from last year on the good to excellent, Indiana down 9, Ohio down 4, Michigan down 17. And I can attest to that. And so there's a lot of things there. I'm
And I
not
suppose
saying, go
this
ahead.
kind of ties in with what we've said countless times now that, these record yields that a few people were predicting, it only needs a few things to go wrong or not even go wrong,
Yes.
just a few things to not go as well as
Perfect.
expected. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly that. And we're
Yeah.
seeing that more and more creeping in. There's more non-perfect situations.
Well, and that's kind of my point at this point is to say, be careful with these national averages and, your weather maps and your NDVI and some of these other things, and it is the best resource to use at this point in time. We'll start to get some private surveys out pretty soon. We'll have a better feel. I mean, I'm going to expect the numbers are going to be pretty good. If they aren't, then we have we have a bigger issue than we thought because the farmers are responding with worry. If we come in sub 183, in August, this market's going to be surprised. Like at this point in time, a lot of folks are saying we're trading a 187 yield, on this 95 million acres. And so just, we gotta watch. And I have no idea what happens, but I just keep hearing more and more stories of different things, around the Corn Belt that are just little nicks. It's not a crop failure, not
Non-perfect.
even close. It could still be a record. Like it could still be a record at 180, at 181. You know what I mean? But like we're pricing in a 187, which is, you're talking on 87 million acres, 6 bushel, a 500 million bushel production difference. So that's huge, right?
Yeah,
And
no,
so
exactly.
it's one of those things that we'll be paying attention to, but unfortunately there's nothing you can do to fix it for at least another 2 weeks, if at the earliest. And so we'll be paying attention, just continue to watch cash markets, continuing to listen to the boots on the ground, on my side of things, and just really watching what's taking place around the world when it comes to trying to get coverage and stuff like that. We are seeing Brazil basically work to wrap up their harvest. They're 66% nationally. Mato Grosso is over 90%. So, you're basically done at that point. Your harvest pressure may arise in southern Brazil. But you're really not going to see any further panic at this point, and push into the market, exceptionally cheap. And so yeah, it's going to get real interesting here for the next month or so, because we have a lot of data that's going to be coming at us, and a lot of, market moves that are going to be really indicative of what to expect as we work our way into the end of the calendar year. But for now, sentiment is garbage. So just go on vacation for like 2 weeks and let me know when you get back.
Exactly. So look, as you said, there's going to be a very interesting few months, which is not that people need a reason to listen to you, but even more reasons to listen to you.
Maybe, yes. It's a great selling. I love it. You're awesome.
You're awesome. Well, Angie, thank you so much for everything. Sorry to everyone for it being a little bit delayed today. If you are listening live, that's on me. Guys and gals, whatever you're doing today, if you're out in the field, stay safe. If you're in front of screens, keep it tight, and we'll see you all tomorrow. Much love.
Have a good one.